Welcome to Tartarian Tales 41, which was kindled by a Reddit post which reminded me of this book, this atlas, The Theater of the Empire of Great Britain. The theater has never been shut down, and the curtain has never been called. It's still going. And this is, I feel, extra relevant today because Tartary in this land is Russia, the big boogeyman of the media in the world right now. So this is their history. Are they trying to bring it back? Zelensky was in front of a lot of buildings. They have a lot of amazing architecture. They're trying to bring back spirituality and God. What is happening? Is all this Tartaria push the last 4 years a sign that just the old true history is slowly but surely returning, and it's been combated with CRT, and we're destroying that too? I wonder if what is going on and what the real purpose of all of this is, because I can guarantee you the media is lying through their teeth, like they've done ever since I've been personally born, and I know for a lot longer than that. So I wanted to read this passage from this, which is a description of the kingdom of Tartary. So this is that land where Russia is now. This is part of their history. Why was it so devastatingly erased? I have no idea, but I don't know. We want to get back to our history, our roots. They want to as well. This has a great description from the book, and I think you're all going to love it. So I'm going to check it out here. You can take it, you can read it, you can see the link, and then you can continue to look at the cool pictures that I will put up at the end. So enjoy. So here we go. Citharum gens semper antiquissima. It was a judged case long since betwixt the Egyptian and inhabitant of this country, yet were not the Scythians the first which possessed it. At least it was the first name by which they were known, for, before the entrance of Scyths, the supposed son of Hercules, we find here a people which derive their pedigree from Magog, the son of Japheth, and were called Magogans in remembrance of their antique founder. To this purpose Junius and other learned interpret Terram Magogan in the 38th of Ezekiel 2 in Revelations 20.8, and so in sundry places elsewhere of divine scripture take it for other land than that, which was after profane writers called Scythia and Sarmatia, and now Tartaria. Though perhaps these have not all had still the same bounds from the beginning, for what any one kingdom upon the earth hath. All states have been their course to rise and fall, to be impaired or enlarged at pleasure of the Most High, who disposeth the empires as seems best in his wisdom. Of the Magogans we have not much story, yet they have left their name behind them, which is now corrupted into Mongol, as most imagine. While the Scyth bare rule, they infested their neighbors without mercy or equity, and practiced their rapines as far almost as they could find a subject to work on, insomuch that they gave name to all the rude and inhumane nations both of Asia and Europe, north of Danube, which for their cruelty were much feared, and for brutish customs grown odious to the more civil parts of the world. Tolite barbarum mores was meant of these by the poet, and well it might, for who could be more barbarous than the Essenes, which lived here by the Palus Meotis, and, as Herod in his 4th book of Histories delivers, were wont to sing their parents to the grave, invite their best friends to feast with their father's flesh, and use his skull as a cup to drink in at their lavicious banquets. Who more than the Axiacae, who quenched their thirst with the blood of him whom they first slew, as it gushed warm from his wounds? Who more foolish proud than the Agathyrsi, who, as God and nature had come short in their making up, were used to mend their beauty by a deformed painting, an ugly staining of their bodies with mostly colors? Our Picts are supposed by some to have had hence their original. If were too much to recite here the other scattered nations which overspread the earth, for she was, as most style her, the officina generis humani, and sent forth swarms of her brood, which soon fastened themselves wherever they set footing, for they were strong of body, bold and heady, beyond the rule of valor, distinguished not right from wrong in their quarrels, but reckoned justly their own whatever they could clasp by force of arms. In this they all practiced almost without difference of sex, unless in this, that their women were most warlike. Witness that incomparable story of Tomarus, who cut off the Persian Cyrus, and 200,000 more of his soldiers at one encounter, and cast his head into a cauldron of blood with his upbraid for the slaughter of her son Pergapales, satia te sanguine chem sititi. Nor was she the single one that put off the weakness of her sex to take arms, for here lived those professed Amazons, which admitted no man into their camps, but at set times of necessity, to preserve their race. Yet were they a terror to the world, vexed a great part of Asia the less, and built the renowned Ephesus, Smyrna, Cuma, Magnesia, etc. These had their time. The Goths or Getae succeeded, and were inheritors as well of their mischievous customs as ill-got possessions, for which they purchased them the name of pollency among their neighbors, thieves and destroyers, such as were no less grievous to them than their predecessors. Doubtless a curse of perpetual tyranny lies upon this wicked empire. For when next the Tartars came on, the state itself was not much bettered, nor the innocent which lay near, any whit more secured. These last have been supposed to be the remnant of those 10 tribes which were led captive by Salmanassar. How likely the reasons are, I will not dispute. But surely, if so, they must have retained some knowledge of the true God, at least some precepts of civility from their forefathers, though never so long since. For what people can we read of in stories which have at any time been enlightened with the truth, and yet afterward fallen into that gross barbarism which is now found among the Tartarians? See their character which, as they are most described, deals impartially, gives them ill-fashioned bodies, answerable to their rude minds, fit houses for so unclean guests. Their stature is different. The most have large shoulders, a broad face with a crooked nose, deformed countenance, swarthy color, hollow eyes, hairy and untrimmed beard, and head close-shaved. Their speech is boisterous and clamorous, their noise and singing like the yell of wolves, and endurance of hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and watching equals them, in strength of body, to the most able beast, for it exceeds the common power of a man. Their lust is without law, for they accept no kindred but their own mothers, daughters, and sisters. No species, for they mix with beasts, nor sex, for they are insatiate sodomites, and yet take liberty for as many wives as they can maintain, which, contrary to our civil courses, they buy of their parents, instead of receiving dowries. Their meat is the raw flesh of horses, without regard how they were killed, or of what diseases they died. Sometimes they suck blood from the living to appease their hunger and thirst, if in a journey they be distressed for want of food. Cities they have but few, nor houses other than movable tents, made of beast skins, which they pitch up by great multitudes in the form of a town, and those are called hordes. When the grass is once eaten bare, and the ground yields not meat for their cattle, they trudge with bag and baggage to another quarter, and so in course they wander through the vast deserts, unsettled, and indeed impatient to be settled, or rather imprisoned, as they take it, within any one bounded compass, having the wide world to roam in. Their chief arms are bow and arrows, which they use most on horseback, for their more speedy flight, and have them commonly strongly poisoned, for the more sure mischief to that foe. Their stratagems are downright fraud and breach of truce, for they keep no faith with an enemy, regard not any compact made upon terms of peace, but follow their own sense, and commit what outrages they can with least danger to themselves. Their religion is answerable to their vile customs. Some are pagans, other Mohammedans, yet will not be called Turks, but Bursamani, and their chief priest, Said, whom they reverence more than their maker, and admit that none should touch his hand but their kings, and these too with a humble gesture. Their dukes aspire not above his knee, nor their nobles higher than his feet. The rest are happy if they can but reach at his garment, his horse, his anything. So simple are they in their superstition, and thus have they continued either atheists or false idolaters, ever since their first entrance upon this kingdom in the year I-187. Before they were not esteemed a nation at all, but wild people, without law or reason almost, who lived in the open fields and converted with no other than their own herds of cattle. Their first king was one Chinchis, a man of low birth but high spirit, impatient of that slavish condition to which he was bred. He broke forth at last, and drew more by his example into the thoughts of better fortunes, which he ceased not to prosecute till he had made good his purpose, and not only settled himself in the throne, but enlarged the dominion of the Tartars through a great part of Asia and Europe, which had scarce before heard of any such people. His first forces he employed upon Tenduk in Argon, bounded with the eastern seas. Both of them were then provinces, governed by Uncham, or Presbyter John. Prester John, I wonder. Soon after they got ground in Sarmatia, Asiatica followed their blow upon Russia, Hungary, and Polonia, fetched in the kingdoms of China, Maine, and Bengala, and left many outreaches to their successors, which have not kept entire to this day, as being not able to match so many potent adversaries as they have from every quarter of their kingdom. The limits are now on the north, the Scythian Ocean, on the west, the Muscovian Empire, Sarmatia Europaea, and Mare Caspium, on the south Mount Caucasus, the kingdom of Persia, and part of India, and on the east partly the eastern seas, and partly the kingdom of China. Thus divided, she contains 5 provinces: 1. Tartaria Minor, 2. Asiatica, 3. Antiqua, 4. Zagathai intra Imaeum, 5. Cathay extra Imaeum. 12. Tartaria Minor is called likewise Horda Precopensium, a fort of Tartars which have their name from one city, Precops, but inhabit all those plains which lie round about the Pontius Euxinus, or Mare Magor, and Palus Meotis, including the whole Taurica Chersonesus, so that she extends her limits from the banks of the river Borysthenes as far as Tanais. Her chief province is the Chersonesus, a peninsula 70 miles in compass, which took the name of Taurica from Olyris, who, they say, first plowed this land with a yoke of bulls. It was invaded by one Eulanus, from whom the inhabitants of this whole region were sometimes called Vulani, as they were after Crim Tartars, from that city Crim, once the king's feet of this peninsula, though it stood not within her limits, nor her principal town was Theodosia, now Casa, where there was heretofore a colony of Genoas, till they were dispossessed by Mahomet, the 8th emperor of the Turks. Eupatoria, Parthenium, and other towns of this Tartaria Precompensis, which stand without the Chersonesus, are Oxacon, which this people took from the dukes of Lithuania, and Tanis, which stands in the utmost part of this Tartaria, above the mouth of the river Tanais, some 3 miles distant. It is called by the inhabitants Azak, and is a place of great traffic and free access for many neighboring nations. Near this southward begins the Palus Meotis, reacheth as far as the Taurica Chersonesus, betwixt which and the mainland is the Bosphorus Cimmerius, and on their south banks flows their Pontius Euxinus, which runs into the Propontis, but returns not. The sea in some places so deep that the water appears at top black, and was therefore called Mare Nangrum, the Black Sea. It might be thought that the people living so near the civil parts of Christendom were better mannered than the Asiatic Tartars, but their stubborn rudeness takes in sole scorn to be taught by any other nation, and therefore stand stiffly to their old course of life, in woods and wild fields, and cease not to commit continual murders and rapines upon the countries adjoining, with an inveterate hate to such as possess the name of Christ, insomuch that they have engaged themselves to pay yearly 300 Christians as tribute to the great Turk, which number they draw out of Polonia, Russia, Lithuania, Wallachia, and part of Muscovia. Asiatica or Tartaria Deserta and Moscoratica differs much from the ancient Sarmatia Asiatica, which in Ptolemy's description is bounded on the west with the river Tanais and Palus Meotis, on the east with Scythia intra Imam, on the north with the Montes Hyperborea, and on the south with the mountains Coran and Caucasus. Very interesting. The inhabitants live in hordes as the rest do, which remove often, and direct their wandering course by observing the pole star. In this too their hordes have divisions, and are known by several names. The chief is Zawal, which for the most part lies betwixt the rivers Volga and Lech, and in regard it is as the mother horde to the rest. It was called Magna Horda, and her emperor Vlachem Magnus Dominus, for so he was, and had full power of a prince, till they were subdued by the Precopenses in the year I506, and after by Basilius, Duke of Moscovia. Next to this are the Kassanenses, which have their chief city Kasan upon the river Volga, near the confines of Moscovia. It was once an entire government to itself, but in the year I551, after many victories and revolts, it was fully and irrevocably vanquished, and made an addition to the Duke of Moscovia's title. The inhabitants here are somewhat more ingenious than the Preoccupenses. They till their ground, and in some places build houses, and practice merchandise with the Turks and Muscovites. Not much unlike to these are the Astrakhanenses, situate toward the Mare Caspian, and have their name from their rich metropolis Astrakhan, 20 Italian miles distant from the mouth of Volga. Both they and it were subdued in the year I494 by the Duke of Moscovia. Besides these, there are many other wild hordes of Tartars. Of the Nohyacenses, Thumanenses, Shibasienses, Kosashienses, Astinenses, Baskerdi, Kirgesi, Malgamozani, these last strange idolaters of the sun, in a piece of red clout hung up before them upon a pole. They live in caves and feed for the most part upon such creatures as creep upon the ground. Some of them are anthropophagi, and hereabouts is the great lake called Kitai. Tartaria Antiqua, the ancient seat of the Tartars, and kingdom of Magog, when both the first inhabitant was placed by the son of Japheth, and when these last Tartars entered under the command of Chinchis. It is the utmost portion of the Tartarian Empire, to the frozen seas on her north, the Scythian on the east, and the Mare de Anian, for it contains many dispersed hordes, all almost subject to the great sham of Cathay. In the most northern tract which strikes into the sea beyond the polar circle dwell the Dani, Neptalite, Makriti, etc. More southward the kingdom of Tabor, and the vast desert Karakorum, and the Mount Altai, the place of burial for the Tartarian emperors. Toward the east seas and near the promontory of Tabin are the regions of Arzaret, which some think to be the very first possessed by the remnant of the 10 captive tribes, and Anian and Argon and Tenduk and Mongol, and many other whose people live after the antique manner, intense, movable. Some few cities they have, poorly built and as rudely customed. Among other incivilities they have this fashion to prostitute their wives and sisters to such guests as they would entertain most friendly. And when it was once forbade by their great sham, they recovered it again with much suit and solemn protestation that they had not thrived since it was laid aside. The ground brings forth good store of especially good rhubarb. Yagathe, the same, with Scythia intra Imam, and is bounded upon the west with Mare Caspian, upon the east with the desert, as far as Lop, upon the north with the river Jaxardis, and upon the south with the Mount Caucasus. It hath the name from their prince, brother to their great sham, and contains it in these 12 several provinces. Zagatai, where Tamburlaine was born, and first bore rule in the city Samarkand, a place enriched by his victories and memorable for the death of Clitus, slain by Alexander in his drunken fury. The seat of the governor is in Bokhara, another town of the best note here. Bactria, now Kokazan, the inhabitants were led by Bessus, which flew Darius, and the first king, which was Zoroaster's, in the time of Ninus and Assyrian, and twice tried the fortune of war with him, but was at last vanquished, and his kingdom made a province to the monarchy. In several ages it hath been tossed into the hands of divers states. Among the rest the Romans had it once in their possession, at which time the inhabitants received knowledge of the truth from the mouth of St. Thomas, but have lost it since by the tyranny of the Saracens and Tartars. Sogdiana, on the north of Bactria, where Gropolis stood, built for a fort against the Scythians, and standing to the time of Alexander, who battered it to the ground. Margiana in Turkestan, east of the Mare Caspian, and was the seat of the Turks before they broke into Armenia. Cathay, the same with Scythia, extra Imam, and is the empire of the great sham of the Tartars, and true progeny of Chinchis. It is compassed almost with mountains and deserts, and is divided from China only by a great wall on the south. The soil is exceedingly fertile, and the people far more civil than in the other parts of Tartaria. Her provinces are Cathay, which is supposed to be the antique feet of the Seres, and is therefore called Regio Serica, for it sends forth excellent silks, stuffs, and chamlets, and other rare commodities, which equalize her, at least in her own esteem, to the best parts of Europe. Her metropolis is Cambalu, 28 miles in compass, besides the suburbs, built foursquare by the river Polysangus, and enriched from India, China, and other regions, with all sorts of merchandise. Here their great Cham lives, but is buried at the Mount Altay, and is conveyed thither by a strong guard, which kills all they meet in the way, and commands them to serve their lord in the other world. Maginus reports from Marcus Polus that while he was in Cathay, 10,000 persons lost their lives upon one such occasion. Tangu, which they say had the art of printing many hundred years before it was known among us. Camel, 3, 4, 5, Tibet, not much differing either from themselves or the other parts of Tartaria, which belong to the kingdom of Cathay. And that is very important. I'm incredibly glad it ended there, with mention of Tibet and connecting it to Tartaria, because we are witnessing that in our lifetimes. And one of you out there sent me this, and I'm not sure if I ever responded by email, but thank you. There was a book they sent that had this little part in it, which made me get the connection between Tibet as well. It was a French kind of children's education book where they were telling about the world, and Tibet is a part of the Tartars, and it was known. So these people, I think what we can get from this description is, there was the savage ones, the tribal, the primitive Tartars, and then there were the absolute royalty, the ones that built palaces and destroyed palaces, battled with Alexander, battled with all these other people that just leveled these things. And these people, imagine the battles here. They were just using whatever they were using. I don't know, maybe ethereal weapons as well, but they were able to destroy these things and these buildings that actually people still have a tough time destroying now with modern day things. I mean, you really do have to blow it up. Hence, a lot of the wars, most likely, true purpose to get rid of all of this stuff. Connecting to Tartaria in Tibet, I think, is fantastic in Russia, because these things need to come out. Tibet is one of our cases of human, just desecration that we've seen. And what if that's the last stronghold? What can we refer from the power of the Tibetans, who I consider to be the most spiritually inclined people still existing on Earth? They've been through so much insanity, and they absolutely they're connected to the Tartars. They're the remnants. Are they the last ones that didn't get wiped out? And what does that say for the spiritual potential for all of us? Does that point towards a time when all of these areas were like Tibet kind of was before the catastrophe of communism? Was that just the mentality? That is a great image of what the past truly was like. Peoples like that, people like Hindus and Jains that have that amazing art from my last video, Ram Ki Vav, and all these other different things, these creations that just depict a world that's absolutely phenomenal. So starkly in comparison to that of the kind of Vatican-ish mindset with, where they look at this stuff as mythology, fairy tale, and just nonsense. But is that kind of partially the point as well? If this is the true stuff, if the Tibetans, I guarantee, have dug a lot deeper into themselves than the priests, especially of late. And you can tell that it's almost like some force is trying to exterminate this miraculous view of our world, this reality and spirituality that is so connected and has infinite potential. There's infinite potential beyond dimensions, beyond the poles, beyond every realm, underworlds, psychological realms, metaphysical realms. It's just a so much more descriptive and beautiful universe than just what we've seen here, and just that, that this is it, that we don't have potential for anything more, that those old buildings are just whatever. Don't look over there. Don't look at that ancient tech. Just fuel is what needs to happen. That's how you power stuff. We're as smart as possible. No. This Tartaria-Tibet connection is key to understanding so much, I think. Why have they tried so hard to target both of these nations and eradicate them from history? They want the spirit gone. Why it's the same method, the same mentality that shadow bans and deletes videos from YouTube. Why do they delete the perfect things, the things that enlighten people, the things that make people happy, the things that expose people to new truths that they never could have imagined? This same force is all over the place, needs to be eradicated. I hope that's what's happening in Russia. I have no idea. The dissonance of information is resounding, but I hope we get to the bottom of it and restore this entire planet to the way it should and have always been, the miracles everywhere. Bless you all. Just wanted to close with and tie back in this map here and what I intend to do maybe in a future video, or some methods that I kind of recommend for others out there to maybe try and research as well. But definitely avenues I will go down is taking a look at each one of these different provinces and trying to find, like, there was a mountain that I mentioned that was where the kings were buried. I think we should find out where that one was. We're the home of the Chinchis, that first Tartarian empire. I'd like to find where that originated and where that was, and try to find some pictures or some old books relating to that. There were so many different things mentioned in this text. I definitely recommend checking them out. And anytime you see a word that like has a specific name or some kind of attribute tied to it in this story, try to find out what it is. See if we can get a picture. Maybe we can even find a local out there that knows a little something about it. Who knows? We all need to remember this stuff. It's fun digging for, and there's so much. It feels like we barely even scratched the surface, and there's so much more to discover. This whole place could be just, everything we see could be destroyed, mastery, and everything below us could be mastery buried, or still being used in some places. Who knows? Is this whole world an engineered masterpiece? Maybe. Bless you all.